How's it going, everyone? My name's Tim Oliver. I was the loud, shouty chair yesterday. Good to see you all again. Today, I really want to talk about server-side Objective-C, but unfortunately that doesn't exist. So instead, we'll do the next best thing, which is server-side Swift, with a lovely tool called Kitura. I have a little bit of an introduction, but I think everyone knows who I am, mostly. I'm originally from Perth. Who else here is from Perth? We're really curious about this. Anyone else? Me, James? Oh. There's more? Okay, there's definitely more. Okay, yeah. So I was like, it can't just be me and James. We have to work harder on that. Like I said, I'm actually living in Japan at the moment. I work at the same company as Kitasuke from yesterday. Although in a weird irony, he was working on the American product, which is in English, and I work on the Japanese product, which is in Japanese. So it's a very good cross-cultural sort of arrangement there. I've been a giant iPhone nerd since the 3G came out in Australia, and I went to Optus and said, could I have an iPhone, please? And they were like, it's going to be like a 3-month wait. So I decided to learn iPhone programming while I was waiting for my iPhone. It's been great ever since. Because I did web development and multimedia at university, but that was before iPhones became about, so I was actually a full-time web developer. And I actually think that iPhones aren't that different from websites. So just, same screen, putting content on the screen. Like, it's not that different. It's just the language is a little bit different. A little bit different. I love open source software. I do a lot of UI experimentation of iOS, and I put most of my code up on GitHub. I love video games. I love Splatoon. Splatoon's basically like adult Call of Duty. And I love karaoke as well, which is there's way too many embarrassing videos on YouTube at this point. So I haven't got a lot of time, so I'm going to be just blowing through really quickly. The idea here is just to lay out exactly what server-side Swift is, how to get started, basically what state it is in right now, and basically if you want to get involved and start using it yourself, or even helping to actually bring it more into reality and like improving how it actually is put together, what you can actually do to contribute to it as well. So in the beginning, iPhones happened. That was the thing. I think we all noticed that. They looked like that a long time ago. They look like this now. This slide's going to be out of date in like 4 days' time. This is great. But the greatest thing to know about the iPhone, I think we keep forgetting about this, is this really revolutionized the world. We're talking about a really high-spec computer in your pocket with constant internet. And the number of billion-dollar opportunities that's generated is a really non-trivial thing. So I think every day I'm doing this, I'm like, wow, this is awesome. This is such an awesome thing. But looking at all of these apps here, all these billion-dollar apps, there's a bit of a rub here, and that's the way that Apple's positioned the iPhone, and because of the constant internet, we've kind of come to this point where every app needs to have some kind of online persistence or some kind of like hook into the internet. Like even things like you'd think like a single-player game. Like people would like, no, I expect to be able to like play the game on my iPhone, and then when I jump on my iPad, the game is there, and my save data is already there, so I can just keep going. It's more like these aren't really the sources of truth. They're just windows into the source of truth, and you can have as many as you want: Apple TV, iPhone, iPad, Mac. So the best apps will cater to this, but this means there's extra work because now suddenly not only do you have to write an iPhone app, you actually have to worry about uploading data and getting it back down again, maybe transforming the data on the server. And because we're iPhone developers, and that's a whole other world, a lot of companies have been trying to make ways that we can do this, make it a little bit easier for iPhone developers to have this without having to be complete back-end wizards. The first one, of course, is CloudKit, which is Apple's official solution. This one's really good if all you want to do is synchronize data, like data off iPhone, onto server, onto iPad. No data transformation. You can do it if you have a back-end, but we'll get to that later. But the idea is this is just like very, very simple, kind of naive data synchronization. And then Google acquired another company called Firebase. And Firebase is pretty good because Firebase has that data synchronization, but they also have this layer on top that lets you do like data transformations. Things like if a user did upload a string and there was profanity, you could filter the profanity on the server side, things like that. And they have a lot of other great features too, like authentication and analytics. So that's really, really good. But then sometimes if that's still not enough, you need more control. Maybe or for regulation purposes, you need to own that data. Then suddenly, obviously you have to build a backend. And the thing is, backends are pretty different to iOS. So there's so many languages out there. I have a WordPress blog, and I still remember how to do PHP. PHP is a language. JavaScript's always good fun. At the moment, my company is actually migrating from PHP to Go. I think Go is pretty awesome. It's like a compiled language on the server that's really fast. And Ruby and Python are also really good choices too. Therein lies the rub. Like I'm spending all my time learning how to write iPhone apps and learning Swift and trying not to forget Objective-C too much. So what does an iOS developer to do? Well, a funny thing happened. Swift happened, and then an even crazier thing that Apple normally doesn't do, they open source Swift. And in the process of open sourcing Swift, they made it able to run on Linux, which was a bit more effort than you realize because that meant they had to pull it out of the Objective-C runtime, make it run on its own. So suddenly we had this really good statically compiled language that runs on Linux servers. And as you know, the cloud is made out of Linux servers. So a lot of smart people, the instant Linux support was announced, a lot of smart people were like, straight away. And like within 2 or 3 months of the open sourcing, we started getting all these really cool Swift server packages. I remember running into the Perfect people at TriSwift 2016, like right after this was announced, and they'd already gotten VC funding and on the way to producing Perfect. And this year, I ran into the Kitura people. They were lovely people, and it was just incredible that the uptick was basically instantaneous when this happened. So I'm going to talk about Kitura because I actually went to Kitura's workshop at TriSwift 2019 this year. They're lovely people, and they're very passionate about Swift and for actually making Kitura. They've been at every conference I've been to since TriSwift, like at AltConf and everything this year. And because of that workshop, I got to actually have a really good play with Kitura and talk to the folks who work on it, get a lot of information about it. And I really liked how simple it was, and it was kind of insane, like the power it gives you. So just to really explain what Kitura is, so it's a free web framework. And it's backed by IBM, a small indie software company. Yeah, like a really big company is backing this, which is great because sometimes, you want to ensure longevity, like IBM's probably not going anywhere. And I've always been wondering, like, what does a web framework mean? A framework and web are two very, very versatile words. Basically what this means is it is a code package that you compile. Basically, they give you the code. You write your logic and you run it, and it basically does the whole run loop of a web server. It is itself a web server, just like Apache, just like Nginx. How do you say it again? Nginx? Nginx, thank you. I was saying Nginx, but that's not right. Just like those two, it is a complete self-sufficient running, run loop powered web server that takes HTTP requests, processes them, and returns them. As a result, it can do everything a web server can do. It can return dynamic REST content, like JSON responses, or it can even be a complete web service or a web app and return HTML content. And so how it works is it actually exposes an API to you in Swift that you can then, you actually write your own business logic on. You can do whatever you want. It'll basically pass you like the URLs the user requested, and you can then respond to that with Swift logic. And the API is, apparently, from what they said, was very inspired by Node. So they've tried to make it very intuitive and familiar to anyone who's been doing web development. So this is not a crazy relearning of the concepts. And again, the same with Perfect and Vapor. They do the same thing, but they have their own different APIs. So again, I'm not going to recommend one over the other. I recommend you check them all out. But in the case of Kitura, they're following the Node.js kind of implementation. And the coolest thing is it's all open source. All the code's on GitHub, and the actual thing itself. If you look at the breakdown, a lot of it's C, but a lot of it's also Swift. So this thing is a Swift library for executing custom Swift logic on a Linux server or on a Mac server. So here's how it works. I'm not going to try and do a live coding demo because I think the demo gods really hate me at this point. It's really, really simple. Step one is you go to kitura.io, that's their main website, and you can get either, and there's instructions how to install it. There is a command line interface that lets you get the package via SPM. But the thing is, when we did the workshop, it was Friday morning, and we'd been drinking all night, and the command line's really hard when that happens. So thankfully, what they've also done is they actually put out a Mac OS app. So you just basically, it lets you specify what type of server you want to make. You just click, I want to make a bare bones hello world or whatever, and it will actually do all the SPM setup for you and just spit out an Xcode project, which is really nice. It's really, really convenient. So yeah, you can do it in CLI as well. It's even just a matter of just creating a package.swift file and just putting it as a dependency and just telling SPM to run. So when SPM actually gets fully integrated when Xcode 11 comes out, SPM is going to take over the world. It's fantastic. The demo app, the demo project they put out is immediately buildable, so you can run it right away. And if you just hit run in Xcode, just like an iOS app, nothing crazy, nothing else to set up, it then runs on your computer a local web server, so you can just jump right into your browser and start testing it straight away on a local instance. You're done. So here's what the app actually looks like. It's very simple, but all it is if you want to make one that is just a REST API, you actually want to make one with a bit more scaffolding, maybe it'll take some extra services. But for this case, I just clicked on skeleton. Skeleton's literally the bare minimum amount of code you need to actually do this. And it just creates this Xcode. This is the Xcode output. So it's literally just an Xcode project, the Swift package manager, Swift file, and the sources is just all the SPM dependencies and just a single file, which is just main.swift. And then this is what the code looks like. So as you can see, the espresso model from Node.js is you have an object called a router, and the router is the thing that's in charge of receiving the request and then working out who is in charge of that request In this case, it's basically if you get a null, if the URL string is just empty, so it's like go to the root. In this case, you can just generate a response. In this case, the response is a text that says hello dev world 2019. You then set up an HTTP server. You can choose the port, and you just send the router. And then you just run. And then that actually just doesn't terminate. That just starts running a run loop, a permanent run loop. Now you have an actual web server just executing. And so you run that, and straight away you get this. So that was like less than 2 minutes of effort just to get a working web server fully powered by Swift. Pretty awesome, huh? So, so here's the thing. What does this actually mean? I mean, the main thing is no other languages, no PHP, although PHP is still a special place in my heart. But it's, we spend all this time getting good at Swift, and Swift itself is constantly improving. We're at this point now where maybe this might be controversial, I still don't believe there's actually one true best practice. Like, you can do anything you want with Swift in any direction you want. It's so flexible. And that, as a result of that, it means there's always something new you can learn about Swift, which means that having to take away time to learn another language just because you need a backend, like if you have to now allocate some time to Go, that means that's less time for getting better at Swift. So this means you can actually now fully focus your attention on one language and getting really good at that one, which is fantastic because then your quality goes up, your code quality goes up, and your actual code base goes up, and it's really good. This is the other really good thing that Kitura, the folks at Kitura do a lot of presentations. I saw this in one of their presentations. They introduced a concept called isomorphic programming. The idea is you have the exact same code on both sides of the interaction, and they're both operating in the opposite direction. For example, you can have on the server, you could have your JSON codable objects encoding the data to JSON, and then if you set up all your packages correctly, you can have the exact same Swift file on the other end doing the decoding. So suddenly you have the exact same code working on both ends of the spectrum. And that's really good because now suddenly you've just cut the amount of code you need in half. Like no longer do you need a Go package setting up this JSON, which could, again, introduce potential issues with compatibility, because it's the exact same code. You'll know that the JSON code will be the same in either direction. So this means you can actually build faster, and it also means you can actually build with more confidence that it's reliable and consistent. So I don't know what to tell you about that, but like the concept of that to me is like really, like this is a game changer. I think this is something incredibly powerful, and it should be the ability to make web services and backends for iOS apps much faster and much more high quality. And Kitura do a very interesting thing. They don't just assume you want everything. So a web server is more than just printing a text saying hello dev world to the screen. There's a lot more involved. And the way they do it is they're all actually separate packages. And for the most part, they're actually separate repos in GitHub. So you can actually just cherry pick what you want, what your service requires. And they've done a lot of the work for you for all these extra services. For example, the main one obviously is a database. So they have like wrappers for MySQL, MySQL, or however you say it, Postgres, SQLite. No Realm, sadly. Realm requires C++ bindings. That's not a thing yet. Other things like being able to do diagnostics and logging and seeing the health of the server. So there's a full-blown suite of code that actually just monitors the status of the backend and actually has a full-blown dashboard that can tell you how everything's going. Nice things like when a user logs in, like managing their session. And on top of that, a variety of user authentication services. It has one that if you want to do your own username and password, that's all in there already. But they also have other ones for like if you want to sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook, they also have wrappers for that. And really, really cool, it's actually a built-in templating engine, not just Markdown, but I think it might be a combination of Markdown and a few other ones, but you can pick whatever you want. So you can actually really do a full-blown web service. You can dynamically generate content, generate web pages, and then send them down. And on top of that, you can also do like static asset serving, but you can do things like put them behind an authentication wall and things like that. But you can also do, in addition to dynamic web content, like static web content, like the images and things like that. And so this one's a bit more complex. They did go through this in the workshop, but I had no idea what they were talking about. You can actually scale this to enterprise levels really easily. And the way you do that is you can actually wrap your entire Swift package into a Docker container. And you can take that container and move it to Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is a container manager that basically works on the principle that as like the server gets more and more hits and requirements go up, it can just duplicate the Docker container and start executing them in parallel. And by doing that, you can actually then get I think it's vertical scaling by running more instances of the same container. And that's really good because that means that's a whole pile of scaling work that you don't have to worry about. And so, of course, being IBM, they recommend you then deploy this on their Blue Mix. You can deploy it to anything that can take Kubernetes and Docker containers. And this is incredibly powerful because this means that suddenly you can make like a Instagram scale sort of like implementation with very little effort on your behalf, because so many people have already solved this problem and made it very easy to integrate with. So now here are the downsides. This stuff is very new. We're talking incredibly new. Like Swift itself is a very new language, and this came out after Swift was open source, so it's still very new. There's still a lot of things they want to do. And I think there's a few blog posts out there. Some people have actually started trying to do this in production. There's been some feedback right now. But if that's something you are a bit worried about, maybe if you have an existing platform and you're considering moving it over, this is something I'd worry about. If you're doing a new project maybe, and you don't expect it to be big, it might be a really good place to test it out. So obviously reliability and stability is a giant concern at the moment. One other thing is this is not the same as the Swift on macOS, because it hasn't got the Objective-C runtime. This is just Swift, nothing else. And some people would actually, to be like super controversial, this might be better, because for the longest while, when Swift is talking to Objective-C, it gets bottlenecked by Objective-C's runtime. So you're taking a statically compiled language and making it talk to a dynamic language, which is much slower. So this might mean that this type of Swift is actually way faster than the Swift on the iPhone. Just something to think about. But as a result, a lot of the features in Swift or just in iOS is based on the Foundation API. Foundation is like the very low-level one that has all these convenience APIs that you use all the time, like NSURL, NSURL components, URL requests, even for things like code compatibility, things like NSArray and NSDictionary. These are all like they're not part of the language, but there's still something that a lot of code relies on. So this is probably the biggest bottleneck at the moment, because Objective-C is not open source, and I don't think I really would want that at this point. What Apple's been doing is this is a little side project on their repo, which is called the Swift Corelibs Foundation project, and they're actually trying to rewrite every single API in Foundation in Swift. So that's a lot of APIs. We're talking well over 100 here. But it's more complex than that, because it's also they need to guarantee it behaves the same as the Foundation API in Objective-C, which means that also it needs a full-blown test suite. So the idea is they're also doing things like, even though it's not critical to Swift, they're also doing things like adding NSArray and NSDictionary support. So if you are wanting to just pull code from iOS onto Linux, even if you did have to drop down to the NSString or NSArray layer for some reason, even though it would be talking to Objective-C on the iPhone, you're just talking to an NSArray wrapped version of a Swift array on Linux. But this is just for source compatibility. And this is where the most help is needed right now, because this is a really, really big project. A lot of people contributing to it, but there's still so much work that needs to be done for it. But it's really, really cool to actually see, because now you can actually go on and see how a lot of these APIs on Foundation might potentially work under the hood. So what can we do? The first thing first is give it a try. I showed you it's incredibly easy. Just download the macOS app, hit build, and give it a shot. The Kitura folks really, really like feedback. If you find anything broken or if you have any good ideas, they're really down for it. In fact, it's all open source. If you actually are down for it, you could even try submitting a PR yourself. And definitely spread it around, write articles. Please don't put your articles in Medium. Like every time I go there now, it asks me for money. It's getting a bit crazy. And if you do feel up for it, definitely, I think the biggest point where everyone could contribute is definitely look at the Swift Foundation project, because that is where the most amount of work is needed to try and get parity between Swift on Linux and Swift on iOS. That once Foundation's at like a really mature level, then that's going to be like really, really, really good for using Swift everywhere around the world, except apart from Apple platforms. So, where is this all at? So, like I said before, Kitura.io is the main place. That's where you can get all the documentation and all the instructions on how to set up. They also have all the code itself is at github.com/IBM Swift. And then this I always keep forgetting. The workshop content, which was making a to-do app, because clearly we don't have enough to-do apps at this point, is not on the Swift one. It's on github.com/IBM. It's called To-Do Backend. So that actually is really good, because that goes through the whole spectrum of setting up, with a sample iOS app as well, set up a full-blown REST API with a database, and then at the very end, actually talking about how you'd scale this with Docker and Kubernetes. So that, if you have some time, I definitely recommend checking out that workshop. But yeah, exciting times ahead, I think. We're on the cusp of some really cool new stuff. This has been a very, very interesting year, I think. And here's to the future. Thank you.
We have some time for questions.
Any questions? Yep.
I wonder what is the performance compared to other popular frameworks like Node.js or
Oh, okay. The question was, I wonder what the performance is like. So actually, I probably should have talked about this a little bit. Kitura actually have gone out and done their own presentations, and they did at one point compare it. And they said, all languages have two different things you have to worry about. The first one is raw performance. So things like Python and JavaScript, which are interpreted at runtime, they're very slow because obviously you have to interpret and then execute. But then you've got other ones like Java, where it is compiled, but it's just in time compiled. So it's fast, but the trade-off is memory consumption is also a giant problem. And when you're running things on a backend that you're not paying for, like Amazon services, I think apparently memory costs more than performance speed, but both of those can add up to cost. The nice thing about Swift is it's statically compiled, which means it's precompiled. This is the same as Go basically. So it's very fast, and it's not just in time, so it's also very low memory. So in both cases, it's basically as good as Go, or even I think they also compare it to Rust. Like we're talking about really, really good performance compared to like PHP and Python and things like that.
I guess still ARC, right?
Sorry?
I guess still ARC.
ARC, what's ARC?
Reference accounting.
That's Objective-C.
And
Wait.
Swift does it.
Well, Swift is, well, I mean, from what I heard, it's more of a Swift, it's more of a interoperability. Yeah, I just don't know.
Not
Yeah.
garbage collected.
It's not garbage collected. Yeah. From what I heard, like IRC is something you have to worry about more when you're in Objective-C land, but Swift, when you're in Swift land, like it's very, very well refined. So it's something you never have to worry about. Other questions? Yep.
Has anyone attempted to do it serverless, like AWS serverless?
AWS serverless.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? Like you just upload the container and
No containers.
I don't know. That's something I'd love to know about if that's possible. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, to jump in and answer that Lambda serverless functional thingy question. I haven't done it myself, but from what I understand, you can do some form of a pre-compiled binary on a Lambda, and that's the process. There are bits of documentation on the internet for it. So yeah, it does work, and people who I've talked to really enjoy it and
Okay.
find it really performant.
Great, thanks for that, Matt. So yes, it's possible.
Okay, one last quick question.
Yep.
Have you ever considered comparing it with Kotlin, for example?
Kotlin. Can Kotlin run on the server?
I would imagine.
This is an iOS conference, so I literally have no idea what Kotlin is. That's a joke. I like Kotlin. It's very close to Swift. It's not funk. It's very fun.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's end of time for questions. If you have any more, I'm sure Tim would be very happy to answer.
No worries.
We can catch up with you in afternoon tea. So
Thanks again, everyone.
For afternoon tea, we start up again at 10 minutes to 4. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Oh, well,